What's up guys, Alex the Graveyard. We're going to be doing the CV fabrication hot side and cold side charge pipe install on our Focus ST today. We do have the option with the HKS Flange. Also, you can get this with the tile flange. This is a popular upgrade for people going big turbo, as most bigger turbos don't support the built-in off valve or bypass valve on the cold side of the turbo. So this is your solution for this platform. Let's get straight to it. All right, so the first thing we're going to do for this install is just get the car in the air. Make sure you take your under tray and this little front under shroud that is attached to your front bumper off. That way we have all the room to reach our charge piping up under the car. I've already got this off, my car's already in the air. We will be taking off our passenger side wheel to get to the OEM blow-off valve location. But before we do any of that, we're just gonna start simple, take the clamp off the hot and the cold side, attaching to the intercooler, and just get these couplers loose on the charge pipes. So I am currently removing the 5mm bolt clamp from the lower side of the coupler that hooks up to the turbo. And now that I have the cold side loose from the brackets that hang it on the bottom of the motor and from the couplers on the end, I can pull this part out and then get the clamp on top of the coupler that attaches to the turbo with the 5mm, and then that just gives me more wiggle room with that coupler to pull it off the turbo. And then the hot side should be all out of the car at that point. So with the CVFab kit, the hot side comes with 4 clamps and 2 bolts. So the 2 bolts will go up onto the bottom through these brackets and secure it up onto the bottom side of the motor. And then these 4 clamps, you'll get 3 8173s and 1 6860. So you'll get 1, 2, 3, and then the small one on the turbo. Super simple. So now that the hot side's off the car, we're gonna mock up our new CVFab unit. So it's going to connect to these 2 threaded bolts on the bottom of the, I guess this would technically be on the oil pan, right against the bell housing of the transmission. But what we're going to do is we're going to line this CVFab unit up to these 2 bolt holes right here, just to ballpark it. We'll worry about seeing the screws through there first, but what we're looking at right now is when it's mounted up, kind of where the edge of the pipe's going to be. You just want to get an idea of what you're looking like on each side to get an idea of how much coupler you need sticking out. So what we're going to do is take this down, and I noticed that my turbo side coupler probably needed to be about 30 degrees north of here, about like that, and I only needed about 3 or 4 inches of reach. So just to give myself an idea, obviously I can fine tune the adjustments when I'm trying to fit it, but it's pretty much lining up. I can make minor adjustments, and that at least gives me a ballpark to start with when it comes to fitting the couplers on this. Okay, so we've got the CV fabrication hot side pipe pretty much mocked up. We've got the couplers on, it's mounted. The couplers are semi-tight. They still have wiggle room in them, so we need to tighten those up. But before we do that, we need to make sure we thread our bolts through the hanger brackets to keep them up there. And John, if you want to get here and you can kind of see the routing we did, it was easiest to apply the couplers to the pipe before putting them on the car, eyeballing them, and then fitting it to the car. So while we still have some wiggle room with the clamps, we're going to thread the bolts in. So now we're doing the cold side pipe. This is where things get a little bit more tricky because we got the BOV routing and all of that, but we're gonna go over it here today and you'll be all set once we're done. But we're gonna start by loosening up the coupler, or the clamp on the coupler that goes to your throttle body. Right down here, it's just a little 5mm. Any small ratchet should be able to get to it. I believe they're also slotted for a flathead, but there's no way you're fitting a flathead down there. But we've already got that loosened up, as well as the one on the bottom. So now we're going to take the wheel off and then get under the car and pull that pipe out. So now that we have loosened the couplers for the cold side and we've pulled that out, we're going to loosen this lower radiator support simply by removing one of these 2 bolts and then loosening the other. This is just going to allow us to have a lot more clearance with this bracket and help us avoid scratching the charge pipe and just giving us more space to get that to fit more easily. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Okay, so first step on reinstalling the CVFab unit is you're gonna take the reducer coupler that goes to your throttle body and just get that mounted on the throttle body, seated well, and then get your smaller clamp of the 4 and fit it over, and then we're just gonna tighten this down. John, you can get a good look and see where we've got the coupler on the throttle body with the clamp mounted up to it. We're just about to tighten it down. Okay, so now that we've got the coupler on the throttle body, we're going to install the charge pipe. But first, since we're going to put an HKS blow-off valve on our CVFab pipe, since it has the HKS flange, make sure you have the right flange for your blow-off valve, otherwise you'll run into some problems. Most important two things right here for installing this blow-off valve. They provide an O-ring for the bottom that needs to be in that flange just like so, otherwise you will have a boost leak, a major one. And the second most important thing is the snap ring. So you can see it's got a beveled edge. That bevel is what gives the clearance to actually hold the snap ring down and apply pressure to seal this to the charge pipe. So you want to make sure that you have that facing upwards. If that bevel is not facing upward, then your blow-off valve is probably going to fall out and you're going to run it over or something, and then you're out of a $250 blow-off valve. So sure, you don't want to do that. This does fit around with just like that if you use that flat surface, and then you can line it up facing towards the bend, and we can seat the snap ring in there using some snap ring pliers. So this is something people commonly run into. They'll think it's seated, but it's not right there. So you want to make sure that it's properly being seated. So we're gonna have to push that down.
5 minutes later.
Okay, so we just did a little bit of a progression of what we just did off camera because a lot of it's a two-man job, and I'll show you why. But this should give you a good insight on how we did this and what the best way is to do. So as we showed you earlier, you wanted to unscrew one of these bolts from the lower radiator support and loosen the other. We ended up taking the second one out completely and using a pole jack to support the weight of the radiator and keep it up out of our way. It's nice to have a second set of hands pushing away from the front of the car with the radiator support to give you more clearance here to line up your piping and your couplers and your clamps. So we started by getting the one on top of the throttle body, and once we got that mounted, we installed the HKS as shown. So once we got this lined up, we pushed it up into the coupler that connects to the throttle body. This was really simple. We just kept upward pressure on this and it lined right up, and we haven't gotten our clamp up there yet, but that will be in one of the next steps here coming soon. And then we were able to get the 2.75 side of this coupler onto the intercooler and then twist it around and made it up with the charge pipe side. And we were able to unbolt these clamps, feed them around this elbow, and get them down as you need. So if it's easier for you to work with these with the clamps off, they can be put on afterwards just by unbolting that clamp. So now what we're gonna do is just make sure we tighten down all our clamps. We'll lower the car and we'll get on top, and we will bring the clamp that's sitting right here up to the lower side of that throttle body clamp, tighten that down, and then we will show you how to run the vacuum lines and install the block off plate. Okay, so now that we have the actual charge pipe installed, we're gonna worry about the stock blow-off valve unit on this car. In my case, it's already been swapped out for an aftermarket unit, but it's still on the turbo housing. So remove the vacuum hose that goes to the port on that bypass valve. So get yourself some long pliers and just squeeze the little clip and pull it off. Now we're gonna use a 5mm Allen head, preferably on a swivel, and an extension to give us a little extra reach, and take the 3 Allen head bolts that hold the stock bypass valve or the aftermarket unit in. Okay, now that we've got the screws off the blow-off valve, we're just gonna pull the blow-off valve out. And then as you can see, the block-off plate is very similar. Make sure you have your O-rings, and just reinstall using the 3 bolts if you had an OEM unit, or for the Boomba, there was 2 aftermarket bolts and 1 OEM bolt, and we just matched up a couple other bolts to that OEM one, and we're just gonna use that to bolt this onto the turbo housing. Okay, so we just finished bolting up that black off plate onto the turbo housing. Now we just need to start running our vacuum line. So HKS doesn't include a vacuum filter, which we spliced in here. The longer side goes away from the blow-off valve, so this shorter side will go right into that vacuum port on your HKS. So take your little block-off cap off, should come right off, and then stick the end of your vacuum hose onto that cap. We're gonna take a zip tie and just zip tie that down. That way there's no risk of that coming off, really, ever. And now we are going to run this through up here, and we will run our lines. I'm just gonna try and shove this up here the best I can and fish it up from the top. So once it's up there like that, we'll lower the car down, pull the vacuum line out from the top, and finish up the job. Now that we've got the vacuum line ran up here on the top side of the engine bay, what we're gonna be looking at is this vacuum line up here to your solenoid on top of the valve cover. So in stock form, this is the port that runs all the way down to the blow-off valve on the stock location that we removed. There's usually a vacuum line that connects this port to that port. I've already removed this, and I've capped this port off with a zip tie and a vacuum cap. So go ahead and remove that and cap that off, and then we can get to mounting the map sensor onto the little billet adapter that CVFab provides. Our map sensor was already running through vacuum, so I did briefly revert this back to stock just to give you a proper idea. So my bolt was halfway out for that reason. Here is the adapter piece that we are going to use to run our manifold pressure, because the HKS unit does not run off of anything but manifold pressure. If you run it off the electronic boost control solenoid that the OEM runs off of, you'll run into issues. All right, so we got some thread tape on this fitting that CVF supplied, and we're just gonna thread this into our adapter, and we should be able to get a deep socket to tighten this down. And then we will remove the OEM adapter from the car to mount this to this. But before we go there, you need to make sure you install this small O-ring around this tab right there, otherwise you might get a boost leak. So definitely do that. Not might, you will get a boost leak. So as you can see, we do have a divot cutaway to allow for the top hat of your OEM hardware to fit right here, and then this will line up there. Once we tighten this down, we'll move it over. We'll just keep that loose for the time being, and then we can run our vacuum source right there. So let's go ahead and install this onto the manifold. So right now we're going to attach this vacuum hose to the manifold adapter just like this. We do want to make sure that we're not using too much line on this, so we're going to cut this down a little bit. Say to about right there will be fine. Just like so. And then we will use our zip tie. And then plug your sensor back in. And that finally wraps it up. That should be all you need to install your CVFab cold side and hot side and route your BOV as needed. The routing process is the exact same whether you use the tile or the HKS unit. Now all that's left is throw the wheel back on, tighten anything down that you haven't tightened already, and take it out for a test drive and enjoy the beautiful noises that HKS makes. It's way more tasteful than most stock location blow-off valves on this platform. So I think you'll like this kit, and it's a great option if you're planning on going meth injection, because the cold side does have a meth port, as well as big turbo, because you need that external location blow-off valve to adapt that turbo for this platform. So if you need help getting set up with a kit for your car, or you're having trouble with your install, feel free to reach out to us here at Graveyard, and we can either get you a hookup on a new kit or whatever you need for your platform, or help you show the ropes to get your kit on your car. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and follow us for more. Okay. Alright. Dude, it's something about a goddamn camera that as soon as it's on, it just
blank
pierces my soul. So props to anyone that works on TV. Okay. So now we're doing the cold side pipe. I'm not going back. All right. Put the camera down. 5 millimeter, 5 millimeter